My father-in-law is Annas. He'd been serving as the high priest for all of Israel until the Romans removed him from the noble position of power. His influence remained despite not having the official position. And he did name 4 of his sons, and ultimately me, Caiaphas, as his successor. We all were Sadducees. We were successful people. We have money and power. On the religious side of things, we only accepted the books of Moses as having any true authority. But our driving force was popularity, power. Because we have money, we were more regarded by others as being better than others. We loved to show off our money. It was really impressive when we gave our offerings. We made sure everyone saw what we did. And believe me, they were impressed. And being a high priest sure had its rewards. The best seats in the first serve, the best food. People would bow and listen to every word I spoke. I have power and authority. On the religious side, it was my job to perform the Jewish tasks of Jewish feasts. I even got to be the guy who went into the Holy of Holies. It was a great show. Everywhere I went, people followed. Everything I did, people were impressed. It was the best of times. Then, there was news of a man named Jesus of Nazareth. I didn't make much of him. Nothing good comes from Nazareth. I began noticing, though, that crowds began following him in the temple courtyard as well as around Galilee. He even had his own gangly group of followers. And at first I just laughed it off, but after a time his crowds began growing larger. Even at times my own temple courtyard began to fill up, not to hear me, but to hear this Jesus. Now things are getting upsetting. What made it harder to handle is when Jesus began healing and forgiving the measly, crippled, lame, deaf, and even those possessed. I worked so hard at keeping this type of filth out of my temple courtyard. And he heals them and brings them in? Really? Does he know he's messing with my kingdom, my rule, my authority? I think not. It's now my responsibility to shut him up, to show him who's boss. Well, first I tried to outsmart him. I loaded questions, but he twisted my questions back and put me in a place where I dare not answer. I then conspired with others I really didn't even like, the Pharisees, who acted like mini judges of everything Jewish. I even brought in some Herodians. I hate these guys. They just think the Romans are great. I hate the Romans. But I hate Jesus even more. So, yeah, between these 3 groups of us, we should be able to shut him up. That's when everything gets worse, right? Not only did Jesus refute all of our questions, but he made us look badly in front of everyone. Does he have any idea what I'm capable of doing? This is my temple. There's no way I'm going to let him, of all people, interfere with what I have worked so hard to accomplish. This is a point in time where everything changes. No more Mr. Nice Guy, right? Gloves come off. I will destroy this man at all costs. Just had to make sure it didn't happen during the Passover feast. Too many people in my city and my temple. Too many people are following him around. I began meeting with the entire Sanhedrin. They're like the Jewish court of authority. And I'm in charge of all 71 of us. So between all of us, we can figure this out. By figure it out, I mean kill him. I said it, kill him. I don't care what it means or how it sounds. I'm not losing everything that belongs to me. He's made my fellow Sadducees, the Pharisees, and all my other Jewish leaders look bad. No one calls us vipers and gets away with it. We've been trying to think of any angle we could find. No success. Until Malcolmus, my servant, tells me that one of Jesus' followers named Judas was here to see us. And Judas was angry for some reason, and he told us he could bring Jesus right into our hands for a fee. Judas took 30 pieces of silver for the privilege of helping us arrest Jesus. What a fool. Let us spend 100 gold coins. So we began by gathering every soldier we could find, hundreds of them. I personally led this army down to the Kidron Valley, up to the Garden of Gethsemane. We were prepared for an all-out war. But then Jesus walks toward us and inquires who we're looking for. We knew who he was. This is our time, our moment. Oddly enough, though, there's no battle. Judas kissed Jesus and presented him to us. Other than one guy hitting my servant there with a sword, nothing much happened. We had him. It was almost over. I knew it was getting late at night, but none of us wanted to wait. We began making it all legal-ish. First, Jesus was brought before my former powerful father-in-law, Annas. He wasn't happy at all with Jesus. We set aside literally every long-held legal procedure to make sure we got the outcome we wanted. My father-in-law punched Jesus in the face, spit on him. Then it was my turn to run a courtroom trial on Jesus. After the trial began, we sought out anyone who could come up with a reason to condemn him. Yeah, it was hard to find two credible witnesses. Many had tried, but nobody succeeded. Until two guys said he talked of tearing down the temple and rebuilding it in 3 days. Their stories didn't really match up, but we didn't care. We had our conviction. He was a rebel. Even with that, I yelled at him and spat at him and asked if he is as he claimed to be, the Son of God. And he didn't deny it. Now we have a better case. Jesus violated the books of Moses. Now we really had him. We can tell the Jews that he claimed to be God, and we tell the Romans he was planning a revolt. So one last step. Because we, the Jews, did not want to be unclean before the Passover, and technically were not allowed to crucify anyone, we needed Pontius Pilate to agree to the death of Jesus. It was a little harder than we thought. Pilate didn't think Jesus was a threat, but we did know that he was a bit of a pushover, and so we manipulated Pilate by telling him he was no friend of Rome if he showed weakness. That worked pretty well. We had one close call when Pilate sent Jesus to be seen by Herod, who happened to be in town during the Passover. Herod thought Jesus was amazing, and he just wanted to perform some miracles for him. Lucky for us, Jesus kept his mouth shut, and Herod sent him back to Pilate. Pilate continued to be that, pushover that we knew he was. Pilate thought that he would be satisfied by talking to Jesus and having him whipped and beaten. He even mocked Jesus by putting him in a purple kingly robe on him. Pilate thought seeing Jesus beaten and bloody would work. Yes, blood was pouring from his head, his face. His wounds were gushing with blood. It wasn't enough for us. We wanted crucifixion. We wanted Jesus to die an even more brutal death. We even went so far as to claim his blood on us and our children. We got what we wanted, and he was on his way to the cross. The Romans took over from here and took him to a well-known place we called Golgotha. Many were crucified here, but on this day, it was like no other. Jesus' crucifixion brought more attention than we thought. Many of his followers were present, crying and carrying on about all that. To me, this was a victory. My kingdom and my temple and my authority was back. I showed him and all of Israel just who was in charge. And I did. My last words to Jesus were mocking words. I and my fellow priests yelled to everyone to look at Jesus and see if he would allow a prophet of old, or maybe an angel, or if he was God, as he said he was, just come off the cross. This is the moment everything changed. Jesus responded by saying, it's finished. And he committed himself to God. And the world went dark, no sun, no light. And the earthquakes began to happen. It seemed like all hell broke loose. In our shock, we were interrupted by some temple workers who ran to tell me that the veil of the Holy of Holies was torn in two, from top to bottom. It was about 3 hours of absolute chaos before it became light again, and all of Jerusalem was in an uproar. People ran everywhere. Even Roman soldiers were crying at the cross of Jesus. Everything was not as I wanted it to be. I gathered what of the Sanhedrin I could find. It became apparent that even though we killed Jesus, some of our own decided to leave our safe and powerful group and follow a dead Jesus. That Passover was like none other. And many of us sacrificed lambs, as we always did, not recognizing that the Lamb of God was just crucified. I even claimed his blood on me and my children just hours ago. I'd been thinking about how to settle down the city and get back to my position of power and authority. And that day, some Roman guard informed me that Jesus' grave was empty. Pilate had even let us set Roman soldiers to seal and guard the grave. But despite everything I had tried, I failed. I could not silence Jesus. I could not kill him. I spent the next few years trying to silence what had happened, but I failed. We could not stop what we had begun. Not many weeks later, his followers began changing the world. His kingdom grew, and his authority and his power changed the world. I saw his followers meeting, worshiping, giving, helping the poor. His kingdom can't seem to be stopped. His power seems to be endless. And his mission is changing lives even thousands of years later. As for me, now you witness the sum results of my life, lost chasing power and authority. My legacy, you see now, sits in a museum where people walk by and just observe. My name is spoken. Everyone gasps at what I've done. I chased for power and caught foolishness. I lived and became the most impressive person I could be, but died knowing I was responsible for killing the King of Kings. I lost everything I thought I could hold on to. My search for power proved my weakness. What I attempted to claim as my own belonged to Jesus the entire time. What I believed to be my authority was never mine to claim. I lost everything that mattered. I literally looked at Jesus face to face, and I hit him, and I spit on him. I killed him.
When I sat down to study for this, I first took out a couple books of history. The Bible doesn't have a whole lot about Caiaphas. It just talks about the events and the things that he did. And I took out some textbooks and studied a little bit about who he was and the history about all of this. And then I set them aside, and I did something crazy, not really. I actually emptied my desk and I sat in Matthew, and I read the scriptures of Matthew about the last week of Christ, and I went to Mark, and then I went to Luke, and then I went to John, and I read all of those. And every time I saw Caiaphas show up, I wrote notes about a little bit about maybe why he did what he did, maybe some character traits that I saw in him, and maybe how does a person get to be like this? And when I got done, I looked through the piece of paper, and something just come glaring out of just like a baseball bat to the face. The type of things that we see in Caiaphas' life that got him to the place that you got him, very well can show up in our own lives. We can see these things. And if it's not for the grace of God, if it's not for God being in our lives and helping us, we have the capacity to be the next Caiaphas. We have the ability as people, whether you're a follower of Christ or even not a follower of Christ, to devote our lives to changing, to chasing power, chasing authority, to make it about my kingdom and not about his, to do the things that we do. So I narrowed it down to three things of the characteristics inside Caiaphas' life that I wanted to talk about to show you why a person could get to where he is. The first one I wanted to talk about is about his religion. One of the things historically we know about Caiaphas is that he inherited his religion. His position of being now mind you, he was the high priest. Let's stop and think about that for a minute. You're not just any priest, you're the high priest. You're the person who's supposed to represent God to the nation of Israel. If God wanted to speak to you, his kingdom, if he wanted to speak to his country, he would do it through the high priest. It was the high priest that would be the one person who would enter the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement to see the glory of God. So Caiaphas just wasn't any extraordinary person who grew to become the high priest. He got there. And how he got there is he married well. He married Annas' daughter. And he just happened to be appointed that. Historically, literally what happened, we don't know what the events did. I did a little research, but I couldn't really find it. But Annas must have done something to really upset the Romans. And Annas was removed from the high priest by the Romans for something, but he was permitted to name his successors. And in his lack of wisdom, instead of seeking for God, what he did is he started naming his own sons as high priest. And eventually he named Caiaphas, his son-in-law, as high priest. But what I want you to see here is he inherited his religion. What I noticed inside that is he wasn't God's choice to be the high priest, but he inherited it through that. And I got thinking about us and our relationship with God. When God works in our lives, when God talks to us, he talks to you, right? I want everybody to know here that there is no second, there is no co-strings Christians, there is no follower of Christ because you inherited it. Because your family's Christian, that ought to make you Christian. And just to prove the point, we recently went through this series called Comeback. Okay? How many people who told their story said something to the effect of, I was born in a Christian family, and my family brought me to church every Sunday? More than half? Most? Just because someone is born in a Christian family and someone is brought to church by their family, we can see that in no way means that they inherited salvation. They didn't. They had to have their own place. They had to have their own time with God. They had to have their own experience, their own salvation. So what I don't want anybody to do is I don't want any of the kids in this church, I don't want any of the grown-ups in this church to ever have the mindset of, you know what, I was born in a Christian family, I was raised in a Christian family, therefore I must be a Christian. Well, my parents followed God, and my grandma followed God, so apparently that makes me there. You can't inherit salvation. It must be something that you have with God. You can't do it as Caiaphas did it. It's got to be between you and the Lord. And I just want anybody to have these thoughts inside their head to think, well, because I come from a Christian family, or because we did this or we did that, it must be. I must be good. I must be it. And please don't do that. Know that your salvation is between you and the Lord, and God working in your life. It's never your family. You can't inherit the kingdom of God. It must be between you and there. So that's one character that I saw about Caiaphas, that he inherited his kingdom, and his religion, But one thing I want you to see is he was blinded by his kingdom. I'm going to use that phrase a lot today. Caiaphas was blinded by his kingdom. He was the high priest. And you saw in the video, it was important for the high priest. He had a following. Wherever he went, people would follow. When it came to being served, he would probably be the first person served. When it came to getting the food from the market, he would be reserved for the best of everything. Okay? He was blinded by his kingdom. He had authority. Okay? He did. He was able to tell the nation of Israel what to do and who's going to do what and when they're going to do it. He had authority. He had decision-making ability. He had all these different things inside there. And all his power, his authority, everything he did, his influence on other people. He had the ability to influence others. Okay? He had certain ways of doing things that other people probably didn't. Maybe his other brother-in-laws that served before him, they might have done certain ways, but Caiaphas had influence. And he loved it. He had so much of it, he loved it so much, he actually became blinded by it. And he had no idea what was in front of him. And he was completely blinded by his kingdom. And because he was blinded by his kingdom, the third thing about Caiaphas is he completely lost the plot. He lost the plot. That's a phrase that's used in literature about losing the plot. Every great story, whether it's Romeo and Juliet, maybe it's Don Quixote, the Muppet movie, I don't know what it is. There's a key theme, there's a plot in all of these different stories that means something. It's what the story is about. Because he was blinded, he completely lost the plot. I mean, think about this for a second. He's actually standing, his vantage point of Jesus Christ is face to face. It's face to face. Eye to eye, face to face. That was his vantage point of Jesus Christ and everything he had to do with it. But he lost it all. He didn't see what was standing before him, the Messiah. Now, one of the things that I did, and I was going to put it all in here, but I kind of took it out because I didn't want to be too long. I know Jeff wants his pulled pork sandwich. I actually did a little mathematics to find out how many people may have actually visibly seen Christ. Of all the people that have ever been created, that have ever been born throughout history, we don't know how many that was. It might have been 100 billion people. And then I thought, Israel's about to stay the size of New Jersey, so if you look at the size of New Jersey, what's the people of New Jersey? How many people have actually seen Christ? And I came up with a number, it's like 0.00005642. Anybody that's ever existed had the capacity to see Jesus Christ face to face. Wouldn't we think in 2019 that if we ever looked at Jesus face to face, that would change things for us? Wouldn't it? Yeah, I would love that. That would change so much. I think I'd be more devoted. I think I would worship more. I think if I had the capacity to see Jesus face to face physically, that would change so much in my life, to be able to do that. Caiaphas was able to do that. And look what happened. Missed it all. He missed it all because he lost the plot. And I don't want to make this just about Caiaphas and his day that we can look back through history, because I want to talk about things. Because people who lose the plot, it actually happens right in front of our faces than it happens today. Now, it could be that people smarter than me may not say certain things from up in front of a church, but nobody accused me of being the smart guy. But I want to talk about things just so you can see the capacity for us in 2019 to act as Caiaphas did in Christ's day. I want you to see that. In the world of Christianity, it's a difficult word to say so sometimes these days because so many different camps and so many different environments and so many different belief systems try to hide under the umbrella of Christianity. So just to say, hey, I'm part of a Christian, in today's society that might mean many, many things. And then when we look at other types of believers or other types of belief systems and things go wrong in those systems, and things go wrong, or they do things wrong, or sin hits the camp, or something goes wrong, wouldn't you agree that sometimes us who believe like we do go, right? That's interesting. Look at that. Look what they did. Okay, but what about us? I don't like definitions. I don't like titles. I don't like banners. But if somebody asks, what type of a believer are you? We're evangelicals. Somebody that would call themselves an evangelical would say that, the motive of my life is to tell other people about Christ. That's essentially what I do, and that's who I am. That's what I do. I might be someone who's an evangelical, and if I had to classify myself some way, that would be it. But does that mean that somebody who believes like us, who follows like us, I mean, think about this. Probably every church on some aspect would say these different things. We think the way that we look at the Bible, we would dare say that we have it right. Right? We're Bible believers here. So everything that we believe, every doctrine that we teach, every class that we have, every Sunday school lesson we do, every sermon that we preach, it must come from the Bible. It must be about the Bible. It must be through this. If the Bible doesn't teach it, if the Bible teaches differently, we don't want anything to do with it. We're this. So we would like to say, in our kingdom, if I can use that phrase, if I can borrow it, we've got it figured out. But what happens when people lose the plot in our world? I want you to see the capacity of that to happen. And it actually being played out right in front of our eyes on the news. And I don't want to drop names and things like that, but people that we would have fellowship with, the people that we teach their classes, their materials within our church that we have, they have lost the plot. Okay? One gentleman literally got his life turned around. He was so famous, he was so well known, he was so popular in what he did that he literally believed he could say anything that he wanted wanted to people whatsoever, and no one would blink because of who he was. You know what he did? He was blinded by his kingdom, and he lost the plot. There's another gentleman who leads one of the biggest church congregations in the country. If I was traveling through his neck of the woods, I would definitely want to go there. And I would have definitely wanted to hear this person speak in that. He became so into his kingdom that it actually became about his kingdom and his power and his authority. And in today's world, this gentleman lost the plot and all of that. And what he did is he turned into almost to a mob-style church leader. And that if any church in the surrounding area attempted to be, or what he felt was competing with them, his mission was to destroy them. Not only destroy the church, but to destroy their family. And this is in 2019, folks. You know what he did? He lost the plot. He was so blinded by his kingdom, he was so blinded by his success, he was so blinded by everything, he lost the plot. Just as we see Caiaphas did. 2,000 years ago, we have the capacity to have these things happen to us today. I just want you to see that. I don't want any of us, whether what church you go to, how often you go to church, how much you study the Bible, I don't want anybody to sit here and think that, you know what, I've got it figured out and I can just cruise. And I can just put it in neutral and I can just glide down the hill in my spiritual life because I've got it right. You know what's going to happen if we do that? We're going to be blinded by our kingdom. It's not going to be about Christ. It's not going to be about Jesus. It's not going to be about his kingdom. It's going to start being about us. And we're going to lose the plot. And I want us to see that we have the capacity, we have the capability in 2019 to be the next Caiaphas. And if we could do something as a church to make sure that doesn't happen, that's why we want to talk about these different vantage points of that. So with that being said, what I want to do is I want to focus on the vantage point of this. So here we have Caiaphas, and one of the things we know about him and his world, right, is he actually had the ability to see Jesus face to face, eye to eye, and it might even have been nose to nose sometimes, literally nose to nose sometimes. So Caiaphas had a vantage point in looking at Christ, and what I want to talk about for the rest of the talk today, I want to talk about what Caiaphas saw when he stared in Jesus' eyes, and then I want to talk about what Jesus saw when he stared in Caiaphas' eyes. So we want to talk about that today. So when Caiaphas saw Jesus, when Caiaphas looked at Jesus, the first thing that Caiaphas saw was a threat. He saw Jesus as a threat. You saw that in the video, and he did that because Caiaphas, it was about his kingdom. It was about his authority. It was about his influence. And it was about his legacy. Caiaphas wanted everything to be about him. And he saw Jesus as a threat to him. You know what? He was right. He was absolutely right. Jesus is a threat to all those different things. He's a threat to everything. And it's the greatest threat ever. Because when we have Jesus as a part of our lives, when we give ourselves to Christ, when we surrender to Christ, what we're going to find out really, really quickly is that, you know what? About my power, it doesn't matter anymore. It's about his. Whatever authority I think I had, it's not mine anymore. It's about his. Whatever legacy I thought I was trying to create on earth, whether I wanted to be famous, whether I wanted to be rich, whether I wanted to be powerful, whatever I wanted my legacy to be, it automatically becomes worthless. And here's an interesting twist to this. Unbelievers, people who refuse to follow Christ, people who say, you know what, I don't want anything to do with it. Sometimes I think that they have a better view of what this means than even believers do. Because one of the key reasons when we talk to somebody about Christ and we say, hey, all this inside there, we talk to them about Christ and forgiveness of sins and all these different things, and people will come and say, nope, I don't want anything to do with it. You know why? Because they know giving their life to Christ is a threat to everything. That their lifestyle, everything that they want to do, everything that's about their life, that it's going to go away. Because when you give your life to Christ, he changes everything. Is it overnight? Oh no. It is a lifetime of learning, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes inside there, but it is a threat. So Caiaphas saw Jesus as a very specific threat. And he was right. He was right about that. He saw his authority going away. He saw his capacity going away. He saw his kingdom just going away. Everything that Caiaphas had fought so hard to create, that fought so hard to make his, he was beginning to lose it on every aspect whatsoever. And everybody struggles with this. right? Even us believers, those of us who've accepted Christ as Savior, who've dedicated with that, let's just be honest. We struggle in our life with giving control to Christ. We struggle with this, right? We turn everything over to Christ. We say, I surrender all. Here's my soul. Here's my life. Here's my everything. And as long as everything's a bed of roses, we'll trust Christ with everything. But the minute things start getting tough, what's our first default reaction as believers? To regain control. To try to figure it out. To try to know what the next step is. Do we think, Jesus, did you forget about us? Did you not know what's going on? Did you whatever else? We're going to try to regain control inside her. It's a struggle our whole life to do that. How much am I going to make Jesus Christ? And one of the titles of Jesus, you can say it with me if you get this, his title is Jesus Christ the Lord. What is a Lord? A Lord is someone who oversees all, right? A Lord is not someone who's a part-time leader. Someone who's the Lord of your life is a full-time leader of that. And we struggle with those things. We do that. So is Jesus a threat to our lives? Absolutely. But it's the greatest threat we could ever face. Because he will be the Lord of our life. And he will oversee everything. And we must surrender to him. The next thing that Caiaphas saw when he stared Jesus face to face is he saw Jesus as an opportunity. Now, it's a really interesting read. I didn't want to get too much into this in the talk today, but in John chapter 11, you can read this, and it's really, really interesting. So, Caiaphas was so concerned about his kingdom, and he was so concerned about his power and his authority, that his number one real fear was that the Romans would shut him down. That the Romans would come in and do to him what happened to his father-in-law. So he knew what could happen, and he didn't want it to happen. So he actually looked at Jesus and he saw it as an opportunity, like, hey. And what it talks about in John chapter 11 is the group of the Sanhedrin, they get together and they discuss what to do with Jesus. And he literally says to them, hey, you all know nothing. You all know nothing. Let me tell you what a great idea would be. A great idea would be to be, and listen to this, because Caiaphas was so close to getting it right. But he was so far away at the same time. Caiaphas literally says, it's better for one man to die to save the whole nation. That's what he said about Jesus. Caiaphas said it's better for him to die so that the nation of Israel can live. Was he right? Yeah. He was right not just with the state of Israel, but he said that. It's better that Jesus dies to do that, to save them. So what Caiaphas did, what his take on this was completely different. He saw, you know what? If I can kill Jesus, if we can take him down, if we can do what we want to do with them, just imagine what that's going to look like for us, the Sanhedrin. I mean, for us to take down Jesus, it's an opportunity to advance our kingdom, and it's an opportunity to advance our life. So he saw Jesus as an opportunity to make his kingdom stronger. And I got looking at that after I wrote it down, like, I think we do that a lot today, whether we intend to or not. And there's a lot of market media about who Jesus is that actually tilts towards this direction, about having Jesus as an opportunity to advance their life. A lot of people make decisions to follow Christ, too many, I guess I should say, or some. I don't know what the right terminology is, but there are people who follow Christ for the sole purpose of just making their life better. Like, I'm living a pretty good life, but I want to make it better. So in order to make it better is I'm going to invite Jesus to be part of my life so he can take away my problems. And he can make my kingdom better. And he can make my kingdom cleaner. He sounds like a real influential possible person for me to advance what I want to do if I just have Jesus help me out a little bit. Okay, I know some people like that. I do. And that's all they want from Jesus. I've only got one thing for you, Jesus. This is all I want you to do is just make my life better. I need Jesus as an opportunity. Is that why Jesus died? Not at all. Jesus did not come to die so that he could just make my life easier or make my life better. Or you know what? Hey, wouldn't everybody want to go to heaven? Check. Okay, that's all I want of you, Jesus. I just want a ticket to heaven. That's it. I'll see you later. And that's not what Lordship salvation is. That's not what Jesus came for that. He wants to save all of your lives. He wants to forgive your sins. And some people are not like that. And Caiaphas actually literally saw Jesus as an opportunity to advance his kingdom and his power and his authority, and he failed miserably. As everybody will, who just invites Jesus as an additive to their own life. You know, I've got all these different things I do, and I have Jesus. And his job and his role is just to make things better for me. That's what Caiaphas did when he saw Jesus. So when Caiaphas saw Jesus, and they looked at each other, and their vantage point was eye to eye, Caiaphas saw Jesus as a threat. He was right about that for all the wrong reasons. Caiaphas saw Jesus as an opportunity just to advance his own personal kingdom, to advance his own personal authority, and to advance himself on whatever level that he thought it would be. That's what Caiaphas sees when he's looking at Jesus. Now let's just flip this around a little bit. The vantage point of Jesus when he's looking at Caiaphas. In that time, the last week when Jesus was here, it got so hectic for Caiaphas. It was a little bit crazy over everything that was going on that week. Matter of fact, the temple was being filled with people. People were coming all over the place. And the only thing that they wanted to know is, where's Jesus? Is he coming? Do you see him? Do you see him? That's all they were looking out for. And Caiaphas is just livid. Because the whole Passover week, there's thousands and thousands of people coming to worship and celebrate the Passover in Jerusalem. And all they wanted to do is find out where Jesus is. And Caiaphas has had it. And I got to set this up a little bit to explain what was happening next. Is I just want to talk a little bit about one of the things that Caiaphas did that week and that I read on that was really interesting. So one of the things that he did during that week that he oversaw was called the cleaning of the tombs. Okay, so during the Passover week, it's very important that from a religious standpoint, you as a Jewish believer, you remain clean. So what you would do is you would literally bathe, you would offer your sacrifices, and you would be ceremonially clean for the Passover. You needed to be that. You needed to wear your best clothes, and you needed to remain clean. Okay? Now, one of the things that you can't do as a ceremonial clean person is you can't touch anything that would be dirty. And one of the things that was around Jerusalem a lot would be tombstones. Okay? They didn't have different ordinances like we do, where there's tombstones here, or there's a graveyard here, and then there's the market, and there's whatever else. All throughout Jerusalem, they had tombstones everywhere. And what you wouldn't want to have happen is you wouldn't want any people coming from out of town and walking over and saying, hey, how far to the near... Oh, I'm unclean. They'd have to go back, they'd have to clean up, change their clothes, offer new sacrifices. You wouldn't want that to happen to a Jew. So one of the things that happened earlier before the week of Passover is that Caiaphas would have overseen a group of people that have gone around the city, and they would have whitewashed the tombs. They would have cleaned the dust off them. They would have made it very visible and clear that this was a tomb, so nobody would accidentally bump up against it. Nobody would do that. So that was one of the things that Caiaphas would have oversaw that week. Another thing about Jews in that time and place is insults. Excuse me. Insults. So you can call people certain names and they don't like it. But there's certain things that you never ever call a Jewish person. It's the worst insult you could do. It's just you don't call somebody a snake. You don't. Because in Jewish history, and we all know this from Genesis, is that the devil showed up as a what? A serpent. Yeah, a serpent, a snake. So you don't ever call a Jewish person that. That is a capital offense of all. You just don't do that. Okay? So just keep those two things in mind. So when you read this, and in your inserts, I actually put down the 4 books of the Bible that you can go to and read about these different events. So when the time came, and Jesus is looking at Caiaphas, it's the final week. Jesus is there in the Jerusalem. He's in the Temple Mount. He's in that area there. And we already know that everybody's here to see who? Jesus. Nobody cares anymore to listen to who? Caiaphas. So there's a little bit of tenseness here. So they're looking at each other. Jesus is looking at Caiaphas. and he's having a discussion with him. And one of the things that you have inside your notes here is Jesus literally, I got to make sure that I wrote it down the right way. I say it the right way. Jesus saw someone who, but he chose to ignore the truth. Jesus saw someone who knew better, but he chose to ignore the truth. What Jesus does to Caiaphas in the next few minutes is he literally unloads on him in front of everybody. Just unloads. He says a couple things about him, and that's why I said what I said. You're going to say, you know what? You and your fellow Jewish leaders, you are a brood of vipers. He didn't just call him a snake. He said, you are a brood of vipers. And he also said, you know what? You're like a whitewashed tomb, unclean. And you are full of dead man bones. You're not just the dirty tomb, or the whitewashed tomb, Caiaphas. You're the dead man bones inside them. That's who you really are. And I know we like to see Jesus, and we like to see the picture of Jesus with the white Jesus with the flowing hair and the little blue sash on there. That's the type of Jesus we like to see. But Jesus is who he needs to be to all of us. He's who he needs to be. As Lord of our life, he can do with us as he so chooses to do. And if we know better, and we choose to ignore what we know, Jesus has the capacity to treat us as we need to be treated. Right? Now, how many of us are parents here? Right? So how many of us parents have kids here? Yeah. So when you do look at your children, you have your children there, and sometimes, like I got 4 kids, I'll just be telling you right now, sometimes my kids mess up. Yes! Right? Just be honest, right? I love my kids, they're amazing, they're awesome, but sometimes they mess up, and sometimes they know better, but they literally choose to ignore what they've been told to do. Is it the right thing all the time that sweet kid, I know you knew the truth, and I know you knew what you need to do, but you just ignored it. That's okay. Is that the right way to handle it? I got kids here shaking their head no. All right? I got kids in the front row shaking their head no. That's not right the way to handle it. Sometimes parents need to look at their children and be firm with them. Is this not true? Why can't Jesus do that to us? What happens if we know better and we choose to ignore it? Shouldn't Jesus be able to handle us that way? Shouldn't that be able to happen? He is the Lord of our life, and if we say, hey, we're followers of yours, we're your children, and we actively choose to ignore what he asks us to do, he has the capacity to treat us as he needs to be treated. Do that. And that's the vantage point that Jesus had in Caiaphas when he saw him straight face to face. He saw someone who knew the truth. Because truly, if you're the high priest, don't you think you know a few things? You know, he was, even you saw it in the video, one of the things that was most important to his flavor of Jews, the fact that the books of Moses, that means Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That was their Bible, and to them that was it. All the other writings, they're secondary, but these ones I would have memorized. I would have known. I would have devoted my life to be able to say, whatever they teach, this is what I want to believe. And Caiaphas knew that. Believe me, folks, Caiaphas knew better. But he made an active choice to ignore the truth and focus on his own kingdom. And Jesus' vantage point of him was direct and it was very specific. But the one thing I want to show you more than anything else of all of that, when Jesus is looking at Caiaphas, the vantage point Jesus had to Caiaphas, Jesus is looking at the reason that he came to die. He's looking at the reason he came to die. That's why Jesus came to the earth. So we saw the video of Caiaphas, we read about Caiaphas, and we think, oh, what a horrible person. How could anybody be so bad? Jesus came to die for that type of a person. He did. And we might look at people today in our society and think, wow, what a horrible person. What awful, evil things that they had to do. That should never be forgiven. They deserve to go to hell. Well, if we want to just be real with ourselves, the Bible tells us in Romans 3:23, for all are righteous, for we're all sinners. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. Jesus literally died, or came, for that reason. We have a verse for you here. If you're going to use one of our Bibles, you'll find it on page 914 in there. But it's in Romans chapter 5, verses 6 through 8. We'll just read that together. What it says in Romans chapter 5, 6 or 8, it says, "You see, just at the right time, when we were powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will someone die for a righteous person, though for a good person, someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his love for us in this: while we are still sinners, Christ died for us." You guys see that? Right? We're no better than Caiaphas. We're all sinners. And we all fall short of God. We all need this. If everything that you saw with Caiaphas, of all the evil, all the dirt, all everything, I want you to see more than anything else today that no matter who Jesus is looking at, whether it's Caiaphas or anybody that we might deem better than him, right? Jesus saw the reason he came to die. Through everything that happens in life, all the good, all the bad, all the sin, all the ugliness, all the evil, all everything, Jesus' vantage point towards you is the reason he came to die. For everybody. For your neighbor, for your enemy, for your boss, for everybody. We need to look at people with the same vantage point that Christ is. That's someone Christ came to die for. Amen. That's the change that we need to have. That's the vantage point that we need to see when it comes to Jesus looking at us. He did that with Caiaphas. This is the reason that I came to die. To forgive their sins. To forgive their sins. So what I want to talk about here as we wrap things up, in lessons that we learned from Caiaphas, the questions that I want to ask us collectively, whether we're not believers of Christ or we are believers of Christ, what the question I want to ask us is, are we fighting for our kingdom? Are we fighting for our kingdom? Are we living our life to make it about the way we want things to be? Do we sit there and we have a vision of things like, you know what, I made my 5-year plan and this is where I want to be in 5 years, and my sole purpose is to fight to make sure that happens because this is a goal that I want to accomplish, and this is a goal that I want to do. Do we do that for ourselves, or do we sit back and think, you know what, Jesus, where do you want me in 5 years? Where do you want me in 3 years? Where do you want me tomorrow? What's your kingdom for me? What's your vision for me? What legacy do you want for me? We need to surrender to that kingdom, to his kingdom, and not ours. What about the control? Even us as followers of Christ, surrendering to God is a lifetime thing. It's a lifetime struggle. We don't just do it once and think, hey, we're good to go. We're good to go in that. We're going to struggle trying to retake control of our lives. And I just want to encourage us today is that no matter where you are in your spiritual walk, whether you think you're here or you think you're down here, wherever you are in your walk, we just want you to surrender. We just want you to forget the control struggle. Just give it to Christ and let him to do that. So, and then ask yourselves this: what is my kingdom? What am I trying to accomplish? What am I trying to do? What is my kingdom? Well, no different than Caiaphas. If we're trying to focus on our kingdom and make my name something, it will fail. If I want my kingdom to be something awesome, it will fail. Everything that I try to grasp on to make my personal life better, you need to understand it will fail. The only thing that survives in life, after life, is a life lived for Christ. It's what he does. It's got to be his legacy. It's got to be that. And what I want to see through here is losing control is a very difficult thing. But this is what I want to encourage us. Giving up control is very difficult. Current believers, soon-to-be believers, just letting that control get up, that is difficult. But I want to let you know, if I say anything right today, I want to say this. You losing control of your life will be the most beautiful letdown you've ever experienced. It will be the most beautiful letdown. When you get to the point in your life you realize, I can't do it. I don't have enough strength. I don't have enough willpower. I don't have anything with me. I don't have enough with me. I can't do this anymore. To get to that point to say, I surrender. I give up. I leave control to you, Christ. You're going to realize how failed you are in life. And that's going to be the most beautiful letdown you could ever experience in your life. Because the moment you give that surrender to Christ, he takes control and it becomes his vision, his legacy, his kingdom. That is the greatest experience, and you will be welcomed into that. In there. And the last 2 points I want to say inside here is Allow Jesus to be the Lord of your life in every aspect, because Jesus came to die to the worst of us. We saw this with Caiaphas. He came to die for the worst of us. No matter who you know in your life, or who you see, or who you experience, I want you to begin remembering that this is someone who Christ died for. He died for the worst of us. But I also want us to remember that Jesus Christ came to die for the worst in us. If we're honest with ourselves, we're wicked people by ourselves. We have wicked thoughts, we have wicked plans, we have wicked everything about us. Jesus came to die for that. He came to die for the worst in us. And that's all these different things that we need to surrender and that we need to leave at the foot of the cross, and we need to surrender to Christ. And we need our vantage point to be His. And that's the aspect of the full surrender.